Eagles training camp is underway, and so is another season of Uncovering the Birds. I've been down at practice the last few days, and I'm going to tell you about the most important takeaways so far. Jalen Hurts is in another new offense again. He revealed he's doing something different.
I think my situation, as a quarterback, has just been to get on the same page with the offensive coordinator going into the year, and then carry that throughout the rest of my teammates so we're all on the same page. So I'm always seeking alignment, and then I think with different pieces that come and go, it can make that challenging or it can make it easier.
On the other side of the ball, big man Jalen Carter is back, healthy, and with a big new contract. Can the young defensive tackle handle everything that comes with the weight of a new deal?
I don't really think the money is ever going to change me. When you get picked in the first round and top 10 pick, you kind of get a little bit of decent money, and that didn't change me. I still came in, I had a goal. The goal was to get a championship, and it happened. But it's a new contract, and it's time to get more championships for the city of Philly.
Plus, we'll talk about one key injury and other important emerging stories that are coming out of South Philly. All right, I'm now joined by my colleague at the Philadelphia Inquirer, Olivia Reiner, covers the beat with me. Olivia, we've been down at the Jefferson Health Training Complex for the first 2 days of training camp. We've seen, I'd say a fair amount, obviously a little more than we saw in the spring in terms of what the Eagles are doing, both on offense and defense. We've gotten our looks at some of the rookies, some new faces that they brought in the offseason. But I think the number one topic on everybody's mind is Sean Mannion, the new offensive scheme, and how Jalen Hurts is fitting into it. And, I thought there were some really rough patches there in the spring to be expected. But so far, so good. I haven't been, exactly blown away by maybe the downfield offense. But, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about what you've seen so far from Mannion, from Hurts, from the offense, and from a lot of these new offensive pieces that they have out there on the field.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, what stands out is just really how different this offense looks schematically from what we've seen from the Eagles offense in the past. And that does not come as a surprise considering where Sean Mannion comes from and where he played and who he coached for with the Green Bay Packers and Matt LaFleur, a product of the Shanahan-McVay scheme. We all expected to see some of those wrinkles from that tree of coaching implemented in Sean Mannion's offense. And so far, that is, in fact, what we've seen. We've seen Hurts, a lot of Hurts lined up under center. We've seen lots of play action. We've seen lots of pre-snap motion and misdirection and shifts. And that has all that's coming to fruition. It is being built as we speak, as this offense starts to come together. I think you're right, especially on the first day of camp, the first maybe half of practice or so. I thought the offense still looked a little shaky, but it started to come along as the day went on, and we saw a couple impressive, especially like deep over the middle throws from Jalen Hurts, which is something I think a lot of people want to see from Jalen Hurts. Not necessarily something that he can't do, but something that he hasn't done a whole lot in addition to lining up under center throughout his career. But yeah, I think what stood out to me on the field as it related to Jalen Hurts in the offense was just the sea change that is coming for this group. And then, off the field too, I was also struck. I'm curious to hear what you thought too about what Jalen Hurts had to say the first day of training camp. And the fact that he even sat down and had an opening statement, which is something that we don't usually see from him or hear from him, and what he had to say specifically. And really what he didn't say in terms of who he didn't mention, but like the context of where he was coming from in this post AJ Brown world of talking about the need for the team to be, oh gosh, I don't want to butcher it, but essentially 100% alignment and zero entitlement, in terms of having the team on the same page and having this sense of togetherness from the team. And of course, literally, AJ Brown is no longer together with the team. And that can't be separated from the context, the environment in which Hurts is making these comments.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen's a smart guy. He knows how that's probably going to be interpreted. I don't think it's exactly clear whether that was a phrase that Nick Sirianni came up with and Jalen was just repeating it, because he said something about it all starts with Nick, and then he said, but that had me thinking and writing down this Jalen always has his little kind of catchphrases, his little proverbs that he likes to throw out there. And, and I think it's not a bad one. But certainly I think he knows, obviously the unspoken departure, or the guy, no longer on the roster, not being there. And I don't know if he's exactly throwing shade at AJ Brown, but, this is obviously going to be a work in progress with the new receivers that they have here. Dontavian Wicks, I think, has had some moments. He had a really good jump ball catch, something that we all know AJ Brown thrived at for many years at the end of practice on Thursday. Hollywood Brown's had a few moments. Mekhi Lemon, you can see them using him a lot in the slot, and certainly pre-snap motion. Hasn't really kind of done much more than the shorty type of catches. Devontae Smith's been great. We all know what he can do, but now he's matched up more against Quinyon Mitchell than he had previously in other training camps. That's usually been AJ Brown. They've usually had Quinyon following AJ Brown, and I would say Mitchell had the upper hand last training camp until AJ basically shut him down. And Devontae so far, I think, has had the better of Quinyon. And I imagine at some point they'll probably shut him down too as well. But yeah. So that's all great. Jalen under center. It's going to be a big key part of this offense. I think it's great that they've kind of, at least the players from what I've heard, have really kind of been open and acknowledged that this is who we are now. This is our identity. There hasn't been much talk about, okay, what we've previously done. Maybe we'll still do some of this, that, or the other thing. I mean, you hear that a little more from Nick Sirianni, who I think has some authorship and some pride in terms of how successful that offense was at times. And they're going to keep elements of it. And there's certainly carryover from that offense into this offense, as there is in every offense across the NFL. But this is their identity. I mean, it's going to be marrying the run with the pass through under center play action plays, building certain plays off of that. You'll see the outside zone run fake, and then you'll see Jalen kind of naked bootleg to the other side, and there'll be, and you saw it the other day with Devontae Smith, wide open, short cross, tons of space. The throw wasn't great, but those are the type of layups that you typically get from the Shanahan-McVay offense that they want to give Jalen Hurts more of, because it's quite frankly, it's been too much of him dropping, looking, scanning the field, not, having trouble. The first read and second read not always being open for him, and then him having trouble going through the rest of his reads, and it's him either tucking the ball and running or throwing it away, because he does play conservatively. But now that you have, or you're hoping to have, these layups, it helps him. It helps the other guys on the offense. Certainly the offensive linemen, right? Those tackles don't necessarily have to win at the point of attack, because you're kind of creating this kind of faux type of blocking for Jalen Hurts by having the misdirection and the fakes and et cetera. And, I wasn't surprised to hear Lane Johnson specifically come out and talk about how much of this offense is offensive lineman friendly. Certainly one of the big storylines of this camp is going to be Chris Cooper, the new offensive line coach, and what they're doing in the run game, and how much different that is than what they've previously done under Jeff Stoutland, who's a hero here. We know his resume at this point. I don't have to repeat it, but to me, and I think you and I have talked about this before, I think this is the number one thing. To me, it's if they can't get the run game to be close to what it was in 2022, close to what it was in 2025, then everything's going to start to break down, and it's not just because of Jalen, it's because of how they've built this team, the strength of the offensive line, what they have a running back with Saquon Barkley and Tank Bigsby. I'd like to hear what you think about not only what Lane had to say, Jordan Mailata, but also how do you think Chris Cooper is going to kind of adapt here, and how the offensive linemen are going to take to this new wide zone blocking scheme?
Yeah, well, you would think it should play to their strengths, given the athleticism of a number of those members on the offensive line, and the fact that this scheme is designed to stretch defenses horizontally, and getting these offensive linemen firing off the ball more horizontally to try to stress the defense and get them moving sideline to sideline. You heard Jordan Mailata speak about that. And yeah, you heard Lane Johnson talk about having more inside guard help, not being left on an island, as which has been kind of his what he's had to do throughout his career in Philadelphia. So the words he used in the spring were "me likey." He was seemed very excited about the prospect of what this offense could afford to the offensive line. And I think Saquon Barkley seemed excited by it too. In the spring, he talked about reaching out to Todd Gurley and picking his brain about why he was able to have as much success as he was when, he was with the Los Angeles Rams, and they had a lot of success running a similar style of wide zone scheme. So, I think the thing is, we can judge as much as we want right now in training camp about what it looks like. And, we saw Tank Bigsby have some nice runs, especially on day 2, would be touchdown, but it's going to be really hard to judge what any run game would look like until they're, tackling, or at the very least in pads. But, early impressions, at least, having this offensive line be excited by it and the players bought in, you use the word identity, Jeff. And I feel like we don't usually, or at least when Jalen Hurts talks about identity at this point in like the season, really in training camp and preseason, is that like the team won't have an identity until things get rolling and they get into the season and they can start to figure out what works. But the fact that they have at least like a clear direction of what they want to try to achieve, we'll see if it works out. We'll see if they can execute it, but at least to have that direction right now at this point in training camp and for everyone to be bought into that direction, I think is very encouraging.
Yeah. One last caveat about that before we switch to the other side of the ball. But yeah, you bring up a very good point, because like we heard a lot of this 2 years ago when Kellen Moore came aboard, and they did a lot of different things. It wasn't quite the sea change that happens with the Shanahan McVay scheme with the Kellen Moore. There was definitely more carryover with what Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen had done and brought to Philadelphia. But, as we remember in 2025, it was like, okay, we're going to do the Kellen Moore scheme, or we're going to try to do it. And like 4 games into it, it was just like, this ain't working. Jalen, I think, had 6 turnovers in those first 4 games. And they're having him drop to throw way too much. And so I think that was part of it. And the other part was like, hey, we got this stud in Saquon Barkley. We have this offensive line. Let's switch to a more run-focused offense, and let's do a lot of what we had done previously. Let's just kind of tinker with it. And there's going to be some of that. But it would be, I think, a lot harder for them to all of a sudden say, oh my God, we can't do this. We have to do more of the other thing. It's like, no, you brought Sean Mannion to completely change, not completely, but to like, this is different. Again, they're going to be on the center a lot more. They're going to be doing a lot more play action. The blocking scheme is different. There's so much different about this. There's going to be probably some hiccups. There's going to be a work in progress. Throw whatever cliche out you want to throw out there. And I think fans probably going to have to be prepared for that a little bit, because right now everything's great. You're going up against guys in shorts and shells. We'll get a better taste of what they can do in the regular season when they have joint practices with the Patriots in a couple weeks. That'll be the true test, because I'm not sure how much the first team offense is going to play in the preseason. But I'm excited to see what's going to happen when they start facing an opponent in another uniform. The other big storyline of training camp, at least right at the start of training camp, and I think, I'd heard back in March that they wanted to get Jalen Carter signed to an extension. I was a little surprised it took a little bit. Howie Roseman tried to explain it as if Jalen wanted to see what the rest of the market was. He wanted to be the highest, or like they obviously clearly wanted to make him the highest paid defensive tackle in the NFL, which he is now. He's getting $160 million total. It's a 4-year extension. We had heard sort of like through kind of like a nebulous type report from SI about the Eagles being concerned about Jalen. I mean, yeah, big secret, I'm not trying to diminish the report, and I've talked about this before, and it's certainly, it's always a concern when you give a guy that amount of money. It's certainly a concern when you give that guy amount of money when we all know pre-draft concerns about what happened with him and the drag racing and the death of fellow students from Georgia that he was involved in. Beyond that, there's been like various minor transgressions since he's been here. He was late for a meeting one time, which caused the Eagles to bench him at the start of a game. We all know about the spitting incident last year. There's been other kind of like not big things, but like, when it comes to like how he practices, how he, does all the necessary things that you want to see out of your top draft pick in terms of preparation. Jalen is such a phenomenally gifted a player in terms of size and all the athleticism that sometimes he can get away with stuff. He does love playing. I don't deny that, but it's like, will he do the extra things to kind of capitalize on this Aaron Donald type ability that he has? And we know that Aaron Donald had done to make him himself one of the greatest defensive tackles in NFL history. Now, I don't, it may be a little unfair to compare him to someone of that caliber, but like he has those capabilities. Like he can wreck games, and we saw it in 2025. We certainly saw it in the NFC Championship game and in the Super Bowl. They don't likely have a title without Jalen Carter performing at that level. But the concern was like, okay, after the spitting incident, the shoulder, which clearly affected him last year, how much of that was the shoulder? How much of that was Jalen not giving the full commitment that they want to see out of him? And, they're taking a little bit of a leap here, right? I mean, do you agree with that? What do you think are some of the concerns that the Eagles might have about giving him this extension? Not long after they gave Jordan Davis a lot of money. And maybe some of the comparisons between, and this, I guess, differences between those two guys when you're devoting almost like, I guess it's got to be close to $300 million to those guys in terms of, the overall worth of the contracts.
Right. I think, and Howie Roseman kind of spoke about this, and some of the other players were asked about this too, but like the pendulum is going to shift, and it is shifting to the defense in terms of the size of the contracts, the just the commitment that the Eagles are going to have to make to some of these very talented young defensive players that either have become eligible for new contracts like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, and also will become eligible like Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, perhaps a Jalix Hunt, a Nolan Smith, what have you, depending on who they view as being cornerstones worth building around as the Eagles, continue into the future here. And that was at one point what they were doing for their offensive players too. So, it has to swing in the other direction at some point if the Eagles want to continue to be able to sustain success. And that is Howie Roseman's MO, that is Jeffrey Lurie's MO. And they can't pay everyone. So they're making a huge, I don't necessarily want to call it a total leap of faith with Jalen Carter, because he has shown so much promise over his 3 years with the Eagles. But at the same time, they're not, and Howie Roseman said this too, they are not paying him retroactively for what he has already accomplished. They are paying him for what they believe he can become. And there is still, the ceiling is still quite high for him. He still has all the ability, as you mentioned, but he was not as effective as he was, at least in the Super Bowl season, when he shouldered, not to no pun intended, but like shouldered a lot of the workload on the defensive line in 2024 and then 2025, dealing with shoulder injuries that ultimately, he admitted as much, restricted some of his play, and he ultimately had to sit out and miss some time as he recovered from procedures. Just didn't look quite the same. So not only is the question, can he get back to the level of play he was able to achieve in 2024? But can he build on that? And of course, you don't want anything off the field or what have you getting in the way of his ability to achieve on the field if you're the Eagles. But I think you have to take that leap with a player like him and the potential that he has, and maybe perhaps what the Eagles have seen from him behind the scenes that gave them the confidence that, okay, we're willing to take this chance on this player.
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand, there were people that Howie needed to hear from inside the building to vouch for him, for them to give him this extension. So, we're talking about people who work closely with him, whether it's the coaching staff, whether it's the support staff that they have there. And, they're taking a little bit of a, to use your phrase, leap, in doing this. But, he's a 25-year-old, who amongst us haven't made mistakes, as young men and women, maybe not as egregious as the one he had made, prior to coming to the NFL. But, there are greater expectations when you sign that kind of contract, franchise cornerstone type of contract. And it's like, Jalen, this isn't about me. This isn't about the media, but you can't like duck and hide, when you don't have a good performance or when there's issues in terms of you and the coaching staff or what we're hearing about him occasionally. Like, you got to stand up there in front of the microphones. This isn't, again, about the media. To his credit, after the spitting incident, he was at his locker stall and answered all the questions about that and expressed remorse. And then after that, I think for the most part, he was well behaved. You want him to bring that edge to the defense, but at times it's cost them before, and we've seen what has happened on the sidelines with Nick Sirianni going after him, and there's always a head slap waiting to happen with Jalen Carter when he gets a little upset. But that being said, you got to be careful that crossing that line, and I think that's the issue. And they wanted Jalen to play with fire, and quite frankly, frighten the opponent at times. But when you start getting stupid penalties and you start getting kicked out of games, that's a big problem. And you got a big boy contract now. You got to start behaving like a big boy. So we'll see how it pans out. I don't think, despite the concerns, I thought it was always going to be a foregone conclusion that that he was going to get this deal. They have built-in qualifiers. If something does happen, that wouldn't fully guarantee even the full guarantee that he got of $100 million. So, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. We'll have a front row seat for it. The other guy on the defensive side of the ball that is in the news was Jonathan Grenard. The Eagles recently acquired edge rusher, who they traded for over the draft and didn't really practice much, as Olivia, during the spring because he's coming off shoulder surgery, excuse me. And, no concern then, right? Even though he's learning a new offense, he's going to be asked to drop more than he has previously with other teams. And it's funny, Howie Roseman spoke just at the beginning of camp for the first practice, asked about it, one of the first questions. No concern, what we're hearing from the Eagles, no long-term concern. Although I think the fact that they put him on PUP suggests that, the reason why you put him on PUP is that if the injury extends into the regular season and he could miss up to a month, you want to not have to waste a roster spot on Jonathan Grenard. You wouldn't do that if there was the potential of Jonathan Grenard missing time in the regular season. Now, but Howie's like, remain calm, Kevin Bacon and Animal House. But Vic Fangio we spoke to yesterday, and I tend to believe Vic a little more than I do Howie. No offense, Howie, but we know Vic's a truth teller. And he did not plead the fifth when asked about Grenard, and basically said it's going to be a while here. Which, to me suggested he's pretty much out for all of the preseason, which is fine because this is a veteran guy. And at that position, you really, there are some new things and there are things you have to know, but it's not like inside linebacker or safety, where you really are responsible for a lot of what happens in terms of the scheme. Jonathan essentially can mostly pin his ears back. This whole prelude, I've been dragging it on for a while, but it's if they don't have Jonathan Grenard for the start of the season, it's they're right back to where they were last year, which led them to have to trade for Jalen Phillips prior to the trade deadline with Nolan Smith and Jalens Hunt starting. Two promising, young, good edge rusher, I don't just call them exclusively edge rushers, outside linebackers, but the issue is they're not, and they have not yet to show that they're top line edge rushers. And certainly Jonathan Grenard has been that guy over his career, and that's why they brought him in, and that's why they gave up a fair amount in terms of compensation, and also what they gave him in a contract. So what's the answer? Is it going to be those two guys? Is it going to be some of the guys that they acquired just during the offseason that have some experience? Is it going to be the combination of all four? And then, which I think I expect it clearly to be, but is that going to be enough?
That's a great question. And if you're the Eagles, you probably hope that Jonathan Grenard is back by week 1. And Vic Fangio didn't say that he wouldn't be. He was just a little skeptical that he wouldn't be back before week 1. So perhaps he's healthy enough to play week 1. still, hoping is not a plan. And if you're Howie Roseman, you need to have a plan just in case Jonathan Grenard isn't able to start the season. And I don't think Howie Roseman needs me to tell him that. I'm sure he is thinking about this as we speak. But yeah, I think at the moment, you look at the depth of the team, and you're right. This is how the Eagles started last season, with Jaleks Hunt and Nolan Smith being their top two guys. The two of them, as you mentioned, very promising. Hunt led the team with 6.5 sacks last season in his second year. All great things to build on. Vic Fangio spoke highly of them on day two, especially with, in Hunt's case, I thought he had a really nice day, looked really disruptive going and won some of his reps against Jordan Mailata. But still, it's not enough. They're going to need more, and someone who can shoulder more of the workload. And Jonathan Grenard was supposed to fill that gap. But yeah, I think, Vic Fangio also, we can go down the depth chart, but AJ Epinesa was someone who he mentioned too, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of push he's able to make and the role that he is able to grow into, or at least getting who he's where he is in the depth chart as training camp progresses. He spoke highly of him. Arnold Ebiketie had some nice moments too in the run game on day two. So yeah, I think they're going to need as much help as they can get. And I think this is an opportunity for some of those down the depth chart guys at the very least. But, you have to wonder, is Howie Roseman planning for an addition in case Grenard isn't able to start the season? Or is this something that they feel like good enough about their depth and good enough about their top two guys that they can just roll with it until Grenard is healthy and able to play?
I think you're right to assume that Howie could potentially add somebody. My guess is it probably could be someone off the street, just in case, type of edge guy. If Jonathan isn't ready for the start of the season, they could go with those top four guys that you mentioned. I do think, and I think the onus is on him anyway, is Nolan Smith. Like, this is a guy the Eagles picked up his fifth year. Having been a first round draft pick, they picked up his fifth year option after the draft. And, Nolan has had injuries with the triceps, with the shoulders, and there's always been the concern about size, and something that Vic Fangio has openly talked about. He'll always kind of throw it in there when he talks about Nolan. He's like, yeah, for the smaller side, and Hunt's not the biggest guy. He's got a little more size and a little more length than Nolan Smith, but it's like Nolan, good player, never have to worry about effort out there. Setting the edge, he's violent. He's violent at the point of attack. It's just like, does he have the size against these just mammoth athletic tackles as an edge rusher? And there are times where he just goes almost entire games without really getting a sniff of the quarterback. And I think that's why, you brought in a guy like Jalen Phillips on the larger side. That's why you brought a guy in like Jonathan Grenard, again, on the larger side. These are strong physical defensive ends, really, more than anything. And then if you don't have Grenard, all of a sudden you're looking at Nolan and Jaleks, good players. And I think Jaleks as a number two is more than adequate. But then you look at Nolan, it's like, just, is he going to give you that physical presence that you like to have on the edge, especially when it's 4 down linemen rushing the passer? Now, if you had Jalen Carter playing the way we all know they can play, you certainly got Mora Jomo as a pass rusher. Jordan Davis has needs to improve more as a pass rusher. But if they can't get home and Nolan's got a one-on-one and he's not winning enough, then that's where the issue lies. And as good as the defense played last year, there were games when that was an issue. Certainly in the playoff game, they did not get home enough, even with Jalen Phillips. And I think sometimes that gets kind of lost in the defense not hitting kind of the level that they're going to need to hit if the offense, to get back to the offense, struggles here in the early going. But, we got weeks and a little over a month to kind of really digest what's going to happen there. Who knows, Jonathan Grenard, maybe he's back earlier than expected, but we'll be here to chronicle all of it. Olivia, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited about not only training camp, but just doing these podcasts, and I'm covering the Birds, so we'll be there for every step of the way. And again, thank you very much for joining us.
Of course, anytime.
We're going to do something new here at Uncovering the Birds, a mailbag of sorts. I get asked questions a lot on social media, and unfortunately, I don't always get to answer them. But we're going to try and do it here. The first question comes from Woody Zola. We have heard about the changes in offensive scheme under center, blocking scheme, pre-snap motion, etc. In the past, there have been suggestions that either the team or Jalen have been hesitant to use his legs more. How does his ability as a runner factor into this scheme? Yeah, I think that's one of the big questions of this camp and this season, and as Sean Mannion does introduce the new scheme, because we saw last year that, as you mentioned, Jalen didn't run as much, and it was a big reason why the offense didn't function well. As I reported last year, at one point, I'd heard that he was reluctant to expose himself to potential injury. We've seen him get hurt before running the ball. But I also think that the Eagles were on board with that because, you don't want your top quarterback to get hurt. But we also heard as the season went on that, we're going to do more of it. And it never quite happened. And, I'm not really sure. I think some of that had to do with the fact that they just couldn't get to it. The offense was not functioning the way they wanted it to function. But as we know in the past, when Jalen is a +1 factor with the zone read and RPOs, that really opens things up not only for him to run the ball, but for Saquon Barkley and the other running backs. And it's like, how are you going to be able to keep that when he's under center so much? That's, I think, the big question about this offense. It's like, okay, if he's under center 50% of the time, and when you're under center, you can do some design quarterback runs, but generally you can't. That's why historically he's been in the shotgun so much. That's why you see mobile quarterbacks that do it a lot in college. When they get to the pros, it's a struggle for them to all of a sudden be under center a lot. So, you can do that. I think, for instance, we saw in Green Bay with Sean Mannion, where he was the quarterback coach, when Jordan Love went down and you had Malik Willis step in there, who's a running quarterback, they were able to still do some of that. So my guess is we'll see some of it. We just won't see as much of it. And I think Jalen, if this is what he wants as he gets to nearing the age of 30 and later in his career, if this is what he wants, he should fully embrace the change in the offense, because I think it's going to keep him out of harm's way a little more. But that being said, Jalen, one of the things that makes him a great quarterback is his ability to run the ball. Our next question comes from Birds Talk. It's early, but how have the rookie additions to the offense looked so far in this new system? I'm going to focus on the first 3 picks that the Eagles made, all of them on the offensive side of the ball: wide receiver Makai Lemon, tight end Eli Stowers, and tackle Markel Bell. Lemon didn't practice towards the end of spring workouts because he strained his hamstring. So there was some concern about him coming into camp and whether he'd be able to practice, but he's been full go. As I mentioned earlier on the podcast with Olivia, what you see a lot of is him in motion, pre-snap or at the snap. And I think that's one of the ways that they're going to utilize him out of the slot in particular. I did notice the other day him split out wide, and I was kind of intrigued to see how he would do there, because that wasn't really where he played a lot of in college. He's going to be asked to do it here, certainly. But, he had a really good route. He ran a really good route underneath a good cornerback in Reek Woolen, made the catch, got upfield. I think there still are some questions about size, about separation. Didn't run a great 40, but it's way too early, I think, to make any proclamations about Makai Lemon and what kind of a wide receiver he's going to be. What I will say is, in years past, that has been a receiver that you can kind of gauge whether they're how successful or whether they're going to be able to function and be an NFL wide receiver. And there have been guys before that have been drafted later in the later rounds, and you've seen right away, they're like, oh my God, Shelton Gibson, for example, 5th round pick from the Eagles in 2016, right off the bat, it's like, this guy can't catch the ball. And guess what? He couldn't catch the ball beyond just his first camp and never really made it in the NFL. But Makai Lemon doesn't give off a scent of that. This is going to be a guy that's going to be able to function in the NFL. The question is, how good is he going to be? Eli Stowers as well got hurt in the spring and didn't really kind of practice full all the time. So he was quiet. And I think some people were concerned about the fact that he didn't have many catches. He still hasn't had a lot of catches. He isn't working as much with the first team as Makai Lemon. So, he doesn't have Jalen Hurts throwing to him. It's been more Andy Dalton and Tanner McKee, and sometimes even the rookie quarterback, Cole Payton. He has had his moments. I think what stands out is just, he's not a big tight end. You know, he's not like Dallas Goedert. He's not like Zach Ertz. He doesn't have this significant length those guys have. Those guys are 6'5" or larger. He's like 6'3". I think they list him as 6'4", but he's 6'3", and that's fine. Like we've seen that increasingly in the NFL, that you have these kind of hybrid tight ends that are kind of quasi wide receivers, and I think that's how he's going to be utilized, especially early on. Now, that being said, he's going to have to learn how to block. He's going to have to be a run blocker on occasion, but he has not yet been really utilized yet. Johnny Munt, who the Eagles acquired as a free agent in the offseason, he's been really the number 2 blocking tight end. So to be determined in terms of Eli Stowers. And the third guy, Markel Bell, what stands out him, on the opposite side of the ledger, is just how massive this guy is as well. Hurt at the end of spring. But they have him now at right tackle, backup right tackle. Seems to be holding up very well. As we mentioned before in the podcast, these guys are just running around shorts and shells right now. So until they get the full pads on and start facing other teams, and he will certainly play in the preseason, I think then we'll get a better idea of what Markel Bell could do. But if he's good enough, the Eagles would love to have him as the swing tackle, that first guy off the bench at either position. He has played left tackle, but they're trying him out at right tackle right now. And if he can flip to both sides, that really makes him a valuable piece. Well, that does it for the mailbag. Please hit me up on social media with any questions you have, and we'll answer them here.